Rain slipped down the neon signs of Camden High Street, turning every reflection into a restless, distorted painting. It was Thursday night, October 2002, and the narrow alleys hummed with the late-night chatter of London. Inside a dim jazz bar called the Good Mixer, the air smelled of cigarette smoke, cheap beer, and an electric anticipation that only first performances carry. At a table near the back, a girl barely 19 adjusted the cuff of her thrift store dress. Her trademark eyeliner was already too dark, her beehive a little crooked, a defiant messiness that mirrored the city outside. But her eyes were alive, darting constantly between the stage and the patrons. On the small blackboard above the stage, someone had written in chalk, "Tonight, Amy Winehouse, live jazz set." The band was already setting up, an old upright bass with stickers, a cracked drum set that looked like it survived a war, and a Fender guitar that buzzed when plugged in. "First time?" asked Ray, the owner, polishing a glass behind the bar. Ray had seen thousands of singers come and go, but something about this girl made him stop wiping the same spot for a full minute. Amy nodded, her hands fidgeting with the silver rings on her fingers. "First time outside my bedroom, and I'm about to throw up last week's breakfast." Ray chuckled, a dry smoker's cough that had become part of the bar's soundtrack. "Don't worry, these drunks wouldn't notice a bomb going off if the groove's right. Just sing the truth, sweetheart." She tapped the microphone stand, the sudden metal sound amplifying her nerves. The guitarist, Dave, leaned close. "Keys E minor. You start when you're ready. No pressure, just music." The lights dimmed, bathing the small stage in an amber glow that barely cut through the smoke. A few people clapped politely. Someone near the back shouted, "Come on, love, show us what you got." Amy took a deep, shuddering breath and stepped forward. The mic felt cold. She closed her eyes, a habit that allowed her to disappear into the music, protecting her from the judgment of the crowd. "There is no greater love." The first note trembled, uncertain, a fragile whisper of sound. But the second note, filled the room like a tide coming in, carrying the weight of 1,000 heartbreaks. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A man at the bar, mid-sip of beer, turned, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. Even Ray stopped polishing and leaned over the counter, mesmerized. Amy sang like someone confessing a secret she couldn't keep anymore, rather than performing. She didn't just hit the notes, she tore at them, exposing the raw, soulful core. The sound wasn't the polished jazz of her heroes, but the raw, unedited truth of a girl who had already felt too much. When the song ended, an unnatural silence hung in the air, a heavy blanket of awe. Then the room erupted in a sudden, explosive applause that rattled the empty glasses. Ray called from behind the bar, his voice hoarse. "Do another, sweetheart, but something with some sass, yeah?" She opened her eyes, startled by the noise. Her cheeks were flushed. For a brief, terrifying moment, she made eye contact with a stoic, older gentleman in the second row, a retired jazz musician who only nodded slowly. That single nod, that approval from the old guard, felt heavier than the roar of the crowd. She smiled shyly. "All right, let's try something fun. I wrote this one last week." The drummer hit the snare twice. Amy leaned in. "Valerie, right?" Amy nodded. "Yeah, but slower, like we're walking home at 3 a.m. in the rain." The new rhythm rolled in, half jazz, half playful soul. Amy danced lightly on her heels, snapping her fingers. The audience leaned closer, caught between the swing and her irresistible grin. This was the moment the star was truly born, but Amy only felt relief that her knees had stopped shaking. After the set, she stepped off stage and almost collided with the tall man carrying a trumpet case she'd seen earlier. "Watch your step, star," he said, the brass of his case catching the stage light. "I'm not a star," she replied, lighting a cigarette. "I'm broke, and I need a lift home." "That's how you know you're a real musician," he laughed and disappeared toward the bar, leaving Amy with the sting of his truth. Outside, drizzle streaked the windows. The guitarist, Dave, joined her. "You killed it in there, Amy. That was the real thing." Yeah? My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the mic on the Valerie Bridge. That's normal. That's the fear of losing the magic. Means you care. Too much, actually. She shrugged. Then I must care too much. A gust of wind rattled the posters on the wall. Upcoming gigs, forgotten names. Dave pointed at the wall. You'll be on one of those soon, but you need a plan, Amy. This isn't just about music anymore. It's a business. Amy only stared at the damp pavement, ignoring the warning. Was the applause worth the compromise that was surely coming? Back inside, a middle-aged couple approached her. You sound like those old records, the woman said, her voice thick with genuine admiration. The kind my mom played. Dinah Washington, Sarah Vaughan. You've got the heartbreak in your throat. Amy blushed. That's what I grew up on. The man handed her a napkin. Write your name. We want to remember who we heard tonight, because next year we won't be able to afford the ticket. She scribbled Amy Winehouse and drew a tiny heart. Later that night, when most people had left, Ray locked the till and turned to her. You've got that thing, he said, leaning in conspiratorially. The one you can't teach. The voice that sounds like the sound of London crying into its own beer. What thing? The hurt, Amy. The deep, heavy kind that makes people listen and feel less alone. Amy didn't answer. She stared at the empty stage where her voice still seemed to hang in the smoke-filled air. Ray's words were a mystery that shook the purpose of Amy's music. Could art exist without pain? The next morning, Camden was gray and wet. Amy sat by the window of her flat, cat curled beside her, notebook open. She wrote down lyrics between sips of tea and the sound of distant sirens. I told you I was trouble. She hummed the line, tasting the rhythm. The line sounded strong, but she knew the fear underneath it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Answering it would mean inviting the business side of music into her Camden bubble. Hello? Is this Amy Winehouse? My name is Nick Szymanski. I manage artists for Simon Fuller, a friend of Ray's. He says you can sing and that you don't take any shit. Depends who's asking. I'm asking. Come by the studio tonight. Bring your band if you've got one. We think you could be huge, global, not just a Camden secret. Amy blinked. You serious? My voice is a mess today. Completely. 8 o'clock, 27 Denmark Street. Just bring that messy truth with you, Amy. That's the product. She hung up, heart hammering. The cat meowed as if to approve. Looks like we're going to a studio, Mittens, she said, stroking its fur. But I don't like the word product. The studio smelled of expensive coffee and new cables. Posters of The Clash and Dusty Springfield lined the walls, a dizzying contrast of punk defiance and soul glamour. Nick Szymanski stood behind the glass, headphones around his neck. We need a sound that screams Camden soul but whispers radio hit, Nick explained, his voice professional and smooth. Something that pushes the boundaries but keeps it accessible. Think commercial jazz with a modern beat. Amy was already bristling. I think I just need to sing my songs. They are what they are. Amy, we love what they are, Nick insisted gently. But if this album doesn't fly, Island Records drops you. You need sales, not just critic reviews. This is about making your story matter to millions. The difference between Amy's art and the industry's business filled the space between them like a physical wall. Whenever you're ready, Nick finally said through the talkback mic, sensing the tension. Amy adjusted the headphones. The pianist began the intro to You Send Me. She closed her eyes and sang. The first verse cracked slightly, not from nervousness, but from the sudden, cold realization that her personal grief was about to be packaged for profit. By the chorus, her tone was pure velvet, a defiance wrapped in a smooth melody. Nick looked at the sound engineer. She's the real deal, but she's going to be impossible to manage. The engineer nodded. That voice has scratches in the right places, Nick. The kind of scratches you can't EQ out. After the take, Amy stepped out of the booth, pulling the headphones off dramatically. "So, did I sound like a product?" she challenged. Nick smiled. "You sounded like a Grammy winner. Ever made a demo?" "No. You just did. Now let's talk about the next 5 songs and how we make sure they reach every single person who needs to hear that honesty." Camden Night Bus. On the ride home, Amy pressed her forehead against the cold glass. The city lights flickered like camera flashes. In her lap lay a cassette labeled Amy, Demo 01. She turned it over in her hands, the cheap plastic shell feeling heavy with the weight of an unexpected future. She knew this small piece of plastic was the key to leaving Camden, but she wasn't sure if she wanted to pay the price. The bus rattled through the dark streets, past the same bar where she'd sung less than 24 hours earlier. The sign outside now read, "Friday night, open mic jam." She smiled. Maybe next week. As she stepped off at her stop, a busker under the bridge was playing Love Me Tender on a battered guitar. Amy paused, listening. The man's voice was rough but honest, the sound of pure, unadulterated need. He wasn't performing, he was surviving. She reached into her pocket. It was her last coin. She dropped it into his case. "Keep playing," she said. "You sound like you mean it. Don't let anyone tell you to change the tune." He looked up, surprised, the coin glinting in the pale streetlight. "Thanks, miss. You sound like you know a thing or two about needing music." Amy walked away, the busker's melody following her through the rain. Scene. Final moments of the night. Back in her flat, she sat by the window again, notebook open, city quiet, except for the drip of rain. She pulled the demo tape from her lap, looked at the crude label, and made a promise. She wrote down a single sentence under her earlier lyric. Maybe the world will listen someday. Maybe they will understand the pain in the groove. She stared at it for a long time, then underlined the words, "Listen and pain." Outside, the lights of Camden reflected on wet pavement. Somewhere, a taxi horn echoed like a trumpet note, fading into the night. Amy closed her notebook, leaned back, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow I'll sing it better, but I won't sing it safer." She didn't know yet that millions of people would one day echo her words, that her voice would leave Camden and circle the world. But that night, in a small flat above a bakery, she believed in one thing: music could make the pain sound beautiful, but only if you were brave enough to record the real thing. In the next episode, we'll step into the rehearsal rooms where Amy discovers that talent isn't enough, that the pressure to deliver a hit, the early signs of addiction, and the defiance will forge the sound the world would soon call her own. Did Amy sacrifice her art for fame, or did fame force her to become the artist the world desperately needed?